Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast, Scott Parker Goes Live. For those who don't know me, I've been called a covert human rights campaigner. Others, I expect, describe me more as a social entrepreneur and thought leader who invented the first business-owned disability network and has a long career persuading senior executives that treating people properly, including people with disabilities, is good for business, and then showing them how. Some argue that I have supped with the private sector devil so long, with that famous long spoon, that I have in fact gone over to the dark side. Whatever you call me, after some 30 years hacking away at this, I'm still asking the questions that I think really matter. Why is it so hard to get "and what about disability" into the ethical and responsible AI debate? Why do so many of the diversity managers who describe diversity as a choice choose not to tackle disability discrimination? And since when is treating people fairly and with respect defined as a choice? Well, I guess you could argue not robbing a bank is a choice. Why do we have health conditions and it's other people who have disabilities? And why do we just take it for granted that HR practitioners don't have a clue about the impact of disability discrimination on, well, their human resources? I don't know about you, but I expect a doctor to know the difference between your elbow and your knee. And with all that said, let's dive into this episode. Hello, Christine Hemphill. How nice to see you.
Hey, Susan. Lovely to be here.
So as I was thinking about this conversation, naturally, Open Inclusion, your business, the name prompted me to go to your website. And so it tells me that you're a global inclusive research agency that positively addresses disability and age inclusion through broader and deeper authentic insights, participatory design, and inclusive innovation. I want to really understand that. Okay, so I need you to tell me more about this business. What is inclusive research, and what kind of organizations come to you, and what are these deeper insights that they get?
Let's start with what inclusive research is. Research in its simplest form, inclusive research is research that doesn't systemically exclude any specific relevant group. The sort of research we do and we really orient around is disability inclusive research, and that might be people that identify as disabled, are disabled by different access needs, and they might not identify as disabled. And of course, the biggest group of people that might be relevant to are people who are aging into different disabilities. So functional human difference is our area of focus. And unfortunately, people, whether they're disabled, older, and have different access needs and different functional capabilities, are regularly excluded from research as it stands today. So we need to use this term inclusive research to say, hang on, we're going to do better. We're going to make sure that we have the attitudes, the skills, the tools, the approaches to make sure that we listen to and absorb the perspectives of these groups. So it's quite deliberate because unfortunately the way mainstream research works today does exclude many people, even in things like the language it uses, using terms like hard to reach and saying, well, it's your fault for being hard to reach, as opposed to our fault for not doing the work to make it easier to engage. So yes, it's listening to people strategically to understand differentiated experience. In short, it's a really important input to better design, because if you're not listening and understanding the breadth of perspectives of the people that might use a product, service, or environment, you're not going to be able to design something that's suitable for their needs.
That sounds to me so necessary and obvious in a way. It is curious that we're having this conversation.
That's the frustration, is that it is, once you have seen this, it is so unmissable, but it is not yet normalized as the way that things are done. And there's a lot of very hidden exclusion layers in the way insight works, and some of that might be recruitment, and as I say, things like the language we use, but recruitment agencies that might have inaccessible tools in the way that they engage with communities, the way in which we actually design approaches and the method of research. And even you can get all of the way through and get really good research. The way in which you understand it, if that understanding is then made by people that don't have lived experience themselves, there might be a translation error right at the end. So all the way through the process of designing research, reaching to people, engaging with people, making meaning and sharing that meaning, there are specific approaches and ways of doing inclusive research that unfortunately today are not normalized.
I think it would help people to get a better understanding of this world of yours if you could give some examples of the kind of insights you talk about, authentic insights. What insights do organizations get when they go down this road?
It starts with what the research question is that they come to us with. And we work with really different organisations. So we work with mainly commercial organisations. So the sort of insights they would be looking for might be, how do I make a better thing, product, service, environment that someone might want to use? Or how do I make the thing I've already got work more consistently across a range of people? They might have come to us because they've been aware of risk. They might have come to us because they're aware of opportunity. But essentially it's, how might they make something that is going to be more suitable for the breadth of market that they would like to target? That can be anything from a physical product. So we've done quite a lot of packaging design, particularly we did a year of beverage packaging. I will never look at a can or a bottle in the same way again. We work in digital design, and sometimes that is usually that is software design. We've also done a little bit of hardware design and the ergonomics of digital products. And we do quite a lot of work in service design, so thinking about government services, but also commercial services like, things that are fun, going out to the theatre or going to a festival, and understanding how to design those spaces to be more enjoyable to more people. So that's the kind of commercial. We work with government, so government services, helping them really understand the breadth of experiences that people with disabilities might get from the services, whether they're specifically oriented to disabled people like with DWP, or whether the disabled people are part of the cohort of people might be using that service, such as the health system. Third sector organisations, we work with them. We've done some beautiful work with organisations like the RNIB, the Royal National Institute of the Blind, or Motability Foundation, supporting them reach to the cohorts of people that they're wanting to understand to improve their services or to provide better services. And also Centre for Ageing Better to understand, in that case, that was around housing, and particularly kitchens and bathrooms, and what works and what doesn't work for older individuals in their kitchens and bathrooms, whether they identify as disabled or not. And finally, we do innovation research, and sometimes really quite speculative innovation research, and that's quite often with universities. So as an example, we've worked with Brunel and Cambridge University for a number of years now in immersive technologies, and understanding how immersive technologies do and don't work for people with different access needs. And right at the moment, we're running a research project for them around social VR. So when people are engaging within an immersive space with other people in that space, and how that does and doesn't work for people with different disabilities to engage easily, effectively, joyfully, usefully within that space.
It all makes so much sense. I keep saying this. I was reminded as I listened to you of a thing I read saying they were using robots to teach doctors social skills and surgeons, right? Because they're notoriously not terribly good at interpersonal skills. But of course, the people they're interacting with are struggling with hearing because they're in their 80s. Their vision is going. They have speech issues. And none of that reality had been incorporated into programming for the robot. It's just, I liked, the fact that you're out there trying to teach the world to understand human reality just strikes me as so important. You know that. Why am I telling you that?
Yeah, and to summarise that, Susan, I often say where research has a disability inclusion problem, design is going to have a disability exclusion problem. So if we take your robot example, if you're not thinking about the breadth of people that a doctor has to engage with in terms of the full functional breadth, but also emotional and social and cultural breadth, you're not going to teach that doctor the skills that they need across the breadth of patients that they're dealing with. So where we're not listening well enough, we can't design things that are going to be good enough, whether they're a robot or a can of Coca-Cola.
Naming no names. And so this business of yours is quite unusual in that you're working across public and private sector in so many ways. I'm always curious how entrepreneurs like you get started, right? What on earth did you see? How did you realize that there was this kind of gap in terms of the market research industry? And why did you think there was an opportunity when so many people haven't seen that before? What was it about what you saw that was different?
It's a good question, and the answer is, like most good questions, a range of things. Firstly, it was an awareness, and I had the opportunity to get that awareness both personally and professionally. That led me into that kind of professional curiosity of, well, how might we? What might be required to do better here? I was essentially seeing quite a lot of failure in society through a range of disability-informed lenses. I was a designer and innovator at the time. I came into research as the fuel for that. And so, that's why I think open is incredibly practical, because I've been at the other end of receiving that fuel and having to make decisions. So making sure that that fuel is really decision informative is absolutely key to what the work we do. But then once you get curious and you step into this space, the space itself is like this, it's like a positive whirlpool. It pulls you in. Every time you hear another story of success or failure, depending on how things were designed for humans and how that positively, negatively impacts people's life, it makes it so hard to look at the world without that understanding on it. And so, I'm talking to some students tomorrow who are just stepping into the inclusive design space. And I often say to people just stepping into the space, here is the joy and the benefit. You will never look at the world the same again, because you'll have this beauty of perspectives. It's like looking through one of those old-fashioned prism things that you turn them and the colours just move as you turn them. The world will just come in its multiple of colours, shapes, shades and textures that you haven't seen before. That is joyful. The frustration is everywhere you look, you will see design that doesn't work for humans. And that's frustrating. And you will see something that becomes so obvious, and you're sitting here going, but isn't this pretty obvious? Well, yes. And once you're in that world looking through this spectrum of perspective, it is ridiculously obvious. But unfortunately, what is common sense is not yet common practice, and it's not obvious to people that are not listening through that set of prisms.
Well, as you say, it does change the way you look at the world, doesn't it? In fact, I can remember a senior executive saying to me once, Susan, before I met you, I used to just walk through an airport. Now I walk through an airport and I go, oh my God, look at how inaccessible that is. And so it's something about just that magic moment, some kind of switch clicks, yeah?
Yeah. And it's a combination of, there's that moment when you just go, and I think about this a lot in training, because we're now beginning to step further and further into training as well, because it's very frustrating not having a sector that is doing a good enough job. So I've just decided actually a key part of Open's role now is to share skills and capability across the sector more broadly, because there are many people with great intent. They just don't have reach to the skills, to the communities, to the capability to do better. But to think about, how is it that we develop those skills? There is a moment of, the popcorn's popped in the pan, you've heated it, and you've got this moment of, aha, I get it. I really want to learn more and do more and progress in this space. But then there is just this increasing engagement, knowledge, skill, discomfort, comfort, as you constantly learn and relearn within the space. That means the longer I've worked in the space, the more passionate I am, I suppose, about the power of being able to affect positive change.
And so I was curious, again, in thinking about what we were going to talk about today, whether or not I was talking to a businesswoman or the founder of a social enterprise. Is there a social purpose in this, or is it just an accident that the world is a better place while you make profit? And or are you an inclusive design is good design evangelist? So what do you think?
All of the above. I think the starting point is I came in as a practitioner and doing this, and if you think about the history of going from design-led things, the designer is this almost godlike character that's going to imagine this better thing and then put it out in the world, and the whole world's going to, clap them and say what wonderful designer you are, to early noughties. You really had the awareness of human-centered design and asking the people that are actually going to use the product or service, what they think and informing it. And then this generation, this is really looking at who the humans are in the center of that design and challenging the way we do things. I came in as a practitioner and really developed a practice around inclusive human-centered design, because there wasn't a lot of people in the space at the time. We had to make a lot of it up. We had to try things, test things, co-create them with the disability community to make sure that they'd work. So there is a real innovation element to this that is the practice. There is a social goal. Open is here as a social enterprise. Our, everything we do, the other catchphrase that you'll see, within the website is that we are here to ensure that the perspectives of disabled and older individuals inform better design and more profoundly useful innovation. That's why we're here. We believe that we can deliver on that while we're a commercial organisation, because we deliver great research that has real benefit to people and organisations, but we are first and foremost a social impact organisation. And in doing that work, we've realised how much there is a gap in the market. And so increasingly we're stepping towards being an educational organisation, sharing not just the outcome, but the practices and processes that get us to that outcome. So, as an example, at the moment, I'm co-chair of the MRS Unlimited, which is the Disability Inclusive Research Sector Group across the Market Research Society, and I sit on the EDI Council there, helping try and elevate awareness. I talk about mindset, skill set, tool sets, and reach give you data sets, and we need to progress all of those across the sector. That gives you the data sets. The data sets still need to be influencing decision sets and therefore outcomes. And so all the way across that process and practice, we need to lift the sector, and increasingly, we're still on our journey of learning, but we're sharing the learning we've got so far with others that are further behind in that.
And I don't think anyone who knows you would be shy of using the word evangelical if we were to go there. But take me back here a little bit. You've mentioned, of course, the disability community a few times. How do you connect? What, you've got 5 people with disabilities in the basement? I mean, talk about how you bring people with disabilities into this world.
That is the gem at the heart of Open. And actually, this beautiful gem, I've got to give homage to the woman who set this up, because I'm the second lucky legacy holder of this beautiful community. But Marianne Rankin, who is a researcher who's since retired, set up this community back in 1998. She was a researcher with 2 disabled sons and got frustrated with the fact that the world wasn't working very well for her, for them either, and was looking at the world through this prism and built a research capability. That community and her skill and capability came into Open when we set up Open, and that is the gem at the heart of Open. So that community has grown from about 350 people only in the UK at the time to just under 3,000 people, UK and US mainly, with I think 100 in Australia and a number of dozens in Canada and Ireland and so on as well, but mainly US and UK. And that's a community of individuals who wish to be paid to do research, to share their insights as and when they wish. They can say no to anything that comes along that they are invited to, but as and when they wish, that they can say, that's something I'd like to inform. I'd like to, be paid and fairly recompensed for sharing my view on that topic that I care about. So that's the community. But between research and community, there's also another really important 2 layers, and that's co-production of the research. We do that in 2 different ways. One, we have community leaders that are both based in the UK and US, representing each of our 7 sub-communities, helping us make sure that as we design the research, we design it with the needs of each of the quite specific communities in mind and supported. So that's sight loss, hearing loss, mobility, dexterity, chronic health needs, mental health needs, neurodiversity and divergence, and just getting older. And across community leaders with each of those lived experiences themselves, we can, that same prism, look at our research just like we look at any design of a product and make sure it's fit for purpose. We realised as we moved into North America, we needed a different set of community leaders there because cultural context and jurisdictional context matters a lot. So it's not just the lived experience of disability, but of disability within context of the organisations that we're working with. When we're working outside of the UK or US, we work with partners that have that context and that knowledge themselves. So whether that's in Germany or France, Africa, in Kenya, South Africa, Latin America, we've got partners that we trust that are deeply embedded within the community. They both have reached a community themselves, but they also have that cultural context, whether that's linguistic, whether that's etiquette, whether that's how we do things around here, relevant to the disability community and their environment.
I like the fact that you mentioned paying people. I think there's a whole world out there that thinks every disabled person is just going to, on a pro bono basis, tell you whether or not the piece of kit actually works for them.
And Susan, just to pick up on that, when we stepped into this space a decade ago, that was really common. And in fact, so often we'd say, we'd hear from people, but wouldn't they like to do it because it's better for their community? Tell me how many people you've asked in your other mainstream research to do it because it's better for their community, because that's true as well. So this idea that because I'm already from a community that is underheard and therefore under-designed for, that I have more interest in offering my time for free than you would expect with any other community who's also going to benefit from a better product, was something that somehow had got into normalised practice. Yeah. We've done our best to get rid of it. We talk about, you asked about inclusive design before. There are 4 parts to it in my mind. It's efficient and sufficient, just enough but sufficient to get the breadth of perspective you need for this moment in time, for this set of decisions. It's also inclusive, so it's not accidentally or deliberately excluded relevant communities. And if it has, it's very transparent about it. That's inclusive as well. And it's ethical. And the ethical piece is what we're talking about here. It's not just paying people well, but it's ensuring that the research is designed in a way that's safe for people to participate in, that is not going to re-engage them with a moment of trauma that they're not wanting to go back to, or put them at risk in the way that the research is run. And actually, the last thing I should mention when we're talking about how do we do this, we also have our research team. Most of us have different lived experiences of diversity in terms of our functional needs, whether or not people identify as disabled or neurodivergent or carers of people who are disabled or neurodivergent. Most of our team have personal experience in this space, not just professional. That doesn't mean that we know. That means that we know that we don't know, actually.
That use of the word ethical is so important, isn't it? I'm thinking of watching regulators survey older people living in nursing homes. I was tempted to say trapped in nursing homes, who asking them if they were happy with the service they were getting, and the knowledge that actually they dare not say if they were not happy, because the service would really deteriorate If the word got out, they were complaining. And so I think this is an area where the word risk is not sufficiently addressed often enough. So I'm really pleased that you've raised that.
It's also where you asked before, are we a commercial organisation or a social enterprise? It's where, as an organisation that puts impact ahead of profit, we can choose not to do research where we feel it is unethical, unsafe, or it's not going to have any impact. And actually, that to me, that's unethical as well, because you're asking people to share their time, their considered perspectives, and you feel that it's just being done for window dressing and it's not going to go anywhere. There is a place for that if it's part of people's learning journey and that they need rounds of learning to get them there. But if it's not going to have a positive impact and it's going to be a waste of time, it's a waste of our time.
Well, and taking us back to good inclusive design, you say inclusive design is just good design. Sounds sensible to me, but you also talk about design crimes. And I don't think you actually meant the kind of ethical issues. Because you remember, I was telling you about a hotel in Cape Town where the only soap available in the shower was through a dispenser that you couldn't actually pump because of the way it was strangled right here across the dispenser pump, right? And so no one could get soap out of that dispenser. I don't know if that qualifies as a crime per se. It was frustrating a little bit. It's just bad design. But you've presumably got some examples of design crime, really unacceptable examples that you could give us some sense of what's at stake here when you talk about risk and so on.
I think it comes to your term at stake. What is at stake? And I think whenever you're making something or you're responsible for making something better that is already made, you need to ask yourself, what is the consequence of not listening well enough now in terms of the possible impacts and consequences on the people that might use it? Is the consequence that everyone's going to get frustrated and pull the soap thing off the wall to try and get to the ridiculous stuff inside that you can't get to because it's badly designed? Another very small frustrating example, yesterday I was trying to open a packet of lettuce and the edges that are designed to be easy open edges all just pulled off. So then there's no edges. So then you're getting your knife and the consequence is it's frustrating to get into and you might need some scissors. For someone with a dexterity limitation, that might be that they can't get into that product. And actually, as a researcher, I am a curious person and I fill my spare time when I'm traveling between places, and I do quite a lot of travel, watching people engage with environments and products and other people and watching how that does and doesn't work for them. And some of those consequences look frustrating. Some of them look quite funny. You could do quite a dark humor about, bad design. But unfortunately, some of those consequences are really what I would call design crimes. The outcomes of them are very significant on people's lives. When we're thinking about education, employment, health, safety, the consequences might be someone doesn't get employed. You and I have had a lot of conversations about AI use in employment, and it might be that because of bad design that didn't consider the breadth of users that might be required to use a system, someone who is absolutely the right candidate for this job might not get through the process to get to show that. It might be in education that people can't even get the education they need to get to that employment. It might be in transport, which is an enabler of all sorts of things from education, employment, social interaction, health interactions. You need transport to get around. These things are much more fundamental rights to be taken away if you've not considered. And at its worst extent, it could be death. And, whether it's, there's a lot of work showcasing how seatbelt design was designed for men and therefore women died at a much higher rate. Well, what about smaller women who are short of stature, or women who have different bone conditions or different health conditions or different physical capabilities? How are they being kept safe, and how much is the safety of the systems in cars today designed around their needs? Equally, in the health system itself, we did work through the COVID era on the Test and Trace app. That's one of those projects where I just go, I work hard and I love my work, that made it worthwhile. You know, the Lancet put an article out, I think it was in Nature as well, about the impact of the test and trace app in England and Wales that showed how many lives it saved. We worked really, really hard through the whole cycle from before it was launched and right through its monthly redesigns to make sure that it worked for disabled and older individuals, to make sure it worked for people who have just hit that moment of heightened anxiety where they might not be reading all of the instructions because people are put into situational anxiety. Well, we could work with people that live with heightened anxiety and predict how people might behave when they've just been told that they've been in contact with someone with COVID. So that's where, when you start at the edges, the signal is so much stronger from people that have very specifically differentiated perspective. It allows you to design something that's going to be better, you know, more fit for purpose, and in that case, literally save lives.
Well, and that takes me to my next question, because my question was going to be that we're also well aware that the world is focused on what isn't working. I mean, as a Canadian, I joke about what's not working south of the border fairly often. However, you're always looking for the positive trends. It's something that I've noticed in our conversations over the years, something that's taking us to a better future. So just tell me a bit about what kind of significant shift you've seen over the past 10 years. Who is coming to you now, asking for your advice, bringing you their business, if you like, to help them to get this right, that you wouldn't have expected 10 years ago?
It's been really interesting. And, you know, as you say, I am a born optimist. You couldn't start a business in a market that didn't exist and believe that it's going to be successful if you weren't. That market that didn't exist, you know, we now have a team of 34 people working working full on to make this real for the clients that come to us, genuinely asking a question, looking to understand the answer. So there is a market now, and there's a lot of things that have fed into that. I think firstly, just a natural progression of understanding who's missing and understanding that the way in which we ran our research and conducted design before was insufficient. And that's that transition from designers as a god to understanding and listening to people, to understanding and listening to a broader range of people. And that's going to keep going, I think. There's just this trend of awareness and understanding of who's been missing, and therefore there's an opportunity space. That's quite a natural ongoing. It will keep going because there is space that is still under-considered and under-met, and that is very valuable to organisations looking to move into less competitive spaces. So there is just a really commercial driver to this that means that people consistently will get better, I think. Market change. I think secondly, there's also the tools and the methodologies and the ways in which we do research. There is increasing awareness that what we've been doing is not good enough in the research sector, and research organisations beginning to go, if I've bought nationally representative data sample and I want it to represent the nation, and it's just representing them in terms of a balance of gender, age and region, is that really nationally representative? I mean, there's a few characteristics that are probably underrepresented within that, especially if the way in which we reach to people doesn't go to people with different backgrounds. It quite deliberately, well, unintentionally, but significantly underrepresents, whether it's ethnicity, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, people with different digital literacy and confidence, people with different disabilities, people with less time and energy. You know, there's so many characteristics that'll be underrepresented there. So I've bought something that's not delivering to the job, and there's increasing awareness of that. There's also increasing awareness that if you do start at the edges and you start with people with much more differentiated perspectives, that the signal is much stronger and you can create much more innovative, useful products there. And I think that's that. There is increasing awareness from the design community that there is opportunity here. The other thing that's really, it was already obvious 10 years ago, but people have taken a while to get there, aging. People age with disability. The baby boomer generation has got older in the last 10 years. They are the most exacting of any of the demographic communities because every age that they have been, from babies through to older age, they have been fated because they are the biggest demographic in society. We're talking particularly UK, US, and a number of other societies where there was a big boom in babies post World War II. That means that they've also been very successful. They had the asset boom. They've had good, stable employment, more so than other generations have had. And it's been quite peaceful, again, depending on countries that we're talking about, through their lives. They are the wealthiest community in our society. They are incurring disabilities at the highest rate, and they are very different to the previous generation of old, the silent generation, which were make do and get by. This generation is expect high and ask for it and get it. So people are beginning to wake up to that reality, even though we could see it coming. I think as the money and the demands and the disabilities coalesce with aging as well, or are influenced by this additional layer of demographic change, this is a community that cannot be ignored. 1 in 4 people cannot be ignored, you would think, but 1 in 4 people that are increasingly growing because of aging, increasingly wealthy and increasingly demanding, actually also younger disabled people who are increasingly demanding because they're rightly expecting that the work that they are earning, the money that they're earning, is going to be well respected when they're off to buy services and products. So I think that there's just some major both demographic and social trends. Interestingly, right at the other end, the younger generations are also much more demanding of particularly commercial brands in being more inclusive of customers. And in fact, they're wanting to buy from brands that are socially aligned to their values. And happily, the younger generation's social values are much more inclusive than the older generations. So, the buying power isn't just within the community of people that have the needs, but also the community of people that want to buy from brands that are recognising and respecting people's needs.
Brands that are increasingly aware that they have to pay attention and not make assumptions when they do their advertising. They need to do a bit more homework before they take those sorts of risks.
Exactly.
Okay. I want to ask you the final question. Everybody says at the end of an interview like this, so if you had one message that you wanted our amazing audience to hear, what is your one big message?
Just thinking about your amazing audience, you're already listening to this because you care. You've taken the time and you've got to hear in the podcast. But the one really practical thing we can all do in everything we do is ask of any decision you're making, whose perspectives are being included in that decision and whose haven't yet been heard, and how might you reach to close those gaps of the underheard, underconsidered communities that any decision you're influencing might be informed better by listening to. That's true of someone commissioning research, someone using research, or someone conducting research. So wherever you are in the life cycle of things being made or things being made better, by really getting curious about who was included in that insight that I'm making these decisions, or was anyone included in making these decisions to get to the product where it is today? Who wasn't included, and how might we reach to the differences across the communities that haven't yet been heard, so that we can inform our spaces, our products, our services to be better? That's something we can all do.
Well, the slogan I've heard you use is "who's missing?" Because if we don't even know who's missing, we don't know who's in either. Thank you very much.
And demanding that of anyone supporting you, just asking them, who's missing in what you've given me? That's true if someone's giving you a product. That's true if someone's giving you insight.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Christine Hemphill, Open Inclusion. It's been a treat as ever. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
It's an absolute pleasure, Susan, and thank you for making the space for more people to stop, pause, think about, and improve the work that they're doing.
That's the dream.
May
Thank
we all
you.
continue to do so.
If you found this content relevant and perhaps even thought-provoking, please feel free to share with your networks.